Born in London in '86, a stash-show gent named Richard Parliament. He loves to wrestle, but he loves one more thing: handhelds round the world. He fights in his comments and he argues with fans. It's a problem no one understands. If there's two things he loves, it's getting handhelds round the world. Drinking fine wine, fighting fanboys, handhelds round the world.
Top Hat Gaming Man.
Many moons ago, years before I even started a YouTube channel, I was a big admirer of the angry video game nerd. His trilogy of videos on the Castlevania series completely captivated my attention, and the man's clear passion for the franchise converted this spiffing young gentleman into a fan of these Konami titles. As a youngster, I spent my 8-bit early years gaming on the British Amstrad as opposed to the American favourite Nintendo Entertainment System. Obviously, the microcomputers have some Castlevania games of their own, which went completely under my radar, so my attention was not brought to the series until the terrible Nintendo 64 games came out. Due to this reason, I was not particularly interested in the franchise. This obviously all changed though once James Rolfe introduced me to the good games of the series with his classic Castlevania marathon. Due to this, today I have decided to create a Castlevania marathon video of my very own. This time, however, I shall be covering the Nintendo handheld games within the series. Another glaring difference between this video and the marathon produced by THGM is that I am not a bloody basement dwelling nerd. I am a top hat wearing, fine wine drinking gaming connoisseur who has a strong appreciation for the finer things in life. So, rather than producing a video in the decrepit foundations of a house, I have decided to go to a much more appropriate location. Today I am in Transylvania, the location of Castlevania, a structure more commonly known to you as Dracula's castle. This building is often erroneously referred to as the home of the title character in Bram Stoker's Dracula. However, outside of the fictional world, the castle has tangential associations with Vlad Dracula, aka Vlad the Impaler, the putative inspiration for the Dracula character. This terrifying warlord was possibly even more scary than the fictional Count himself. This demented psychopath, sadist and gruesome murderer made a name for himself by impaling his enemies. However, despite all of this, Dracula remains a national hero in Transylvania right up until this very day. Anyway, now we are in an area of such an epically fitting proportion, and since the morning sun has vanquished the horrible night, let us get on with handhelds around the world and look at all of the handheld Castlevania games which are exclusive to the Nintendo portables. Whilst the first Castlevania game on a home console started the franchise off with a bang, the first handheld Castlevania game on a handheld launched the franchise with somewhat of a murmur, I suppose. This game, entitled Castlevania The Adventure, was first released in 1989 and was set 1 century before the events of the original Castlevania game, so it's a prequel in a way. In this game, the player controls an ancestor of Simon Belmonte named Christopher Belmonte, who goes on a quest to defeat Dracula. The game consists of only 4 stages and differs from its NES counterpart by offering no sub-weapons and using hearts to restore health. Another big change to the game is the fact that there are no stairs, which are instead replaced with ropes to climb. Overall, the game received mixed reviews, with the graphics being praised as somewhat competent and the music is complimented for being well composed and consisted of memorable tunes. The legacy of this game has been honoured over the years to some degree, as the game was released in colour as part of the Konami GB collection, and further to this, a remake titled Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth was released as a WiiWare game for the Nintendo Wii. Even further to this, A series of comic books were released in 2005 called Castlevania The Belmonte Legacy, which centred on the character of Christopher Belmonte. All of this milking from a game isn't that bad at all, considering how underwhelming the actual gaming experience is. I guess sometimes a game's name value must simply be much more important than the title's overall quality. Anyway, if you must play this game, my advice would be to seek out the WiiWare version, if you can. 2 years later, we got the next Castlevania game for the Game Boy, Castlevania 2 Belmonte's Revenge. In this 1991 direct sequel to the previous handheld escapade, Dracula returns and kidnaps Christopher Belmonte's son and turns him into a demon. So Christopher once again embarks on a quest to defeat Vlad the Impaler's fictional counterpart. Yeah! This game innovates from the previous game as it features a level select screen similar to that of Mega Man. Sub-weapons also make their handheld debut, such as holy water and axes. Overall, everything in this game is vastly improved from the previous entry in the series. The levels are designed better, the game features tighter controls, engaging gameplay, and the music is even better than ever before. This game is exactly what a monochrome Castlevania experience should be all about, even if we do have to deal with the odd rope again here and there. This is a Game Boy game everyone should have within their collection. To best experience this game, Belmonte's Revenge is included in colour in the 4th volume of the Konami GB Collection compilation. Belmonte's Revenge is really a Game Boy game you must play. The 3rd instalment of the Castlevania games on the Game Boy is another great entry. That is of course if you include it as a Castlevania game at all. 1993 saw the release of a spin-off title known as Kid Dracula. This game is both simultaneously a remake and a sequel to the 1990 Japan-only Famicom game Demon Castle Special Kid Dracula. The game obviously, as I just mentioned, acts as a direct sequel to its Famicom counterpart, and is just as worth owning as a result too. Both titles are full of platforming greatness, fantastic visuals, great music, and awesome controls. I personally think the cartoonish style of these games may even make them the best 8-bit Castlevania games of the entire bunch. However, that is obviously strongly up for debate. In fact, I'll leave that one for you people to argue about in my comment section. What do you think? As great as this game is, there is one massive catch though, and that is the fact that this is one of the bloody rarest Game Boy games on the whole platform. If you're a lunatic game procurer though, like myself, then I suggest you seek it out. However, if you have any senses, then I suggest you simply emulate the game for free instead. The 4th and final Castlevania game on the original Game Boy was Castlevania Legends, which saw release in 1997. Like other games in the series, the game is set right here in Transylvania. This time you play as Sonia Belmont, who at the time was depicted as the first Belmont to confront Dracula at all. Within this game she also meets Alucard of Symphony of the Night fame, who seeks revenge against his father Dracula. Out of all of the Game Boy entries in the Castlevania franchise, this one is by far the weakest. The game suffers from poor level design, which often results in enemies falling on you from high unseen platforms. In other places, platforms seem to be placed completely at random, with no rhyme or rhythm to the experience. Due to these weaknesses, on the whole the game is critically panned, and due to this, long-time Castlevania producer Koji Igarashi has gone as far to remove the game from the official timeline. He has stated that Legends remains something of an embarrassment for the series. Despite all of this though, IGN still gave the game a decent review. However, we all know how reliable their opinions can be. Am I right? After the abomination that was Legends, the next all-new Castlevania game would not surface for another 4 years, which in the end led to Castlevania Circle of the Moon in 2001. Was the new millennium a return to form for the series? Well, yes, I suppose it was to some degree, as Circle of the Moon is a decent effort at the very least. Rather than playing as a Belmonte in this game, this time around you take the role of a gentleman named Nathan Graves, an apprentice vampire hunter. Nathan goes on a quest to rescue his mentor, Maurice Baldwin, who was kidnapped by a newly resurrected Dracula. Circle of the Moon actually acted as one of the launch titles for the Game Boy Advance, and like Symphony of the Night before it, plays in a Metroidvania fashion rather than the traditional A to B side-scrolling manner of the early Game Boy titles. The game also features many RPG elements, and it's overall well polished and an interesting game. The game received critical acclaim from most review sources at the time of review, with one source stating that the game is very long and extremely challenging without being frustrating or a chore to zip through. However, it is of note that the dark graphics of the game sometimes make it difficult to see, particularly back in the day when the Game Boy Advance had no backlight. 1 year after Circle of the Moon, the GBA received Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance in 2002. This installment is set 50 years after Simon Belmont vanquished Dracula's curse and focuses on Simon's grandson, Justy Belmont, on his quest to rescue a kidnapped childhood friend. Gameplay wise, Harmony of Dissonance builds on everything Circle of the Moon presented 1 year prior, overall delivering an even more fulfilling gameplay experience. The game also features a Legend of Zelda-like mechanic where Belmont obtains new items to help him progress through the castle and defeat bosses. This overall adds to a good sense of progression as you slug through this game. This game is certainly worth a play due to its beautiful visuals, fun gameplay and interesting story. The game's only real weakness is its inferior music in comparison to most other entries within the Castlevania series, which is basically a staple for most Castlevania games these days. The third GBA Castlevania game, Aria of Sorrow, released in 2003, marked the end in a fantastic trilogy of games for the platform and once again offers a fantastic Metroidvania experience. The game offers a wackier storyline this time around and is set for some odd reason in the year 2035. You play as a student named Soma Cruz, who happens to be studying in Japan on the evening of a solar eclipse. Dracula's castle, for some dumb reason, forms in Tokyo. I hate stuff like this personally, as I feel it's a rather cheap corporate cash-in to try and make the franchise even more relatable to a Japanese market. It kind of reminds me like when they made Super Mario from Brooklyn in the United States movie, instead of simply from Italy like he is in most other sources. I cannot say I have ever heard of the American plumber Super Mario, let alone something as stupid and bloody contrived as an Italian-American plumber. In fact, whilst I'm on a little moaning tangent, I may as well carry on the momentum. I have noticed that throughout the Game Boy Advance and the later Nintendo DS Castlevania entries, they mostly for some reason completely Japanified the Castlevania franchise. Back in the 8 and 16-bit eras of gaming, Castlevania was designed with a very Western appeal. However, in later entries, they replaced all of this with an overhauled anime art style. Yuck! Which to me draws negatively on the Eastern European feel the game should be trying to portray. These days, whenever I play most modern Castlevania games, I feel like a massive weeboo, which I feel probably helps contribute to Castlevania's lack of global appeal over recent years. Since when was Castlevania supposed to look like bloody Fire Emblem and Sailor Moon? What the hell's going on? Whilst it is fun to moan about some of the nuances which creatively make the Castlevania series less appealing to me, gameplay wise I cannot knock Aria of Sorrow. The game remains consistent in quality with its other GBA counterparts, with even more fantastic Metroidvania gameplay in the style of Symphony of the Night. 2005 featured the debut of Castlevania on the Nintendo DS, this time with Dawn of Sorrow. This game builds on the brain-numbing stupid storyline from Aria of Sorrow on the GBA. This storyline is personally too irritating and too anime for me to even dignify going into any further detail on for now. Gameplay wise, the game offers more Metroidvania and introduces the use of the DS stylus to draw a pattern in order to defeat powerful enemies. Because, you know, pointless Nintendo gimmicks for the point of pointless Nintendo gimmicks. This is what modern gaming is all about, ladies and gentlemen. Despite silly pointless stylus controls, Dawn of Sorrow is just another decent game really, with its only true criticism being too similar to Area of Sorrow really. But with this many Castlevania games being released in quick succession, I guess some of them are going to get a bit samey really. Speaking of so many games in quick succession, the next year 2006 featured the debut of yet another handheld Castlevania game, this time named Portrait of Ruin. This game is the sequel to the Sega Mega Drive game Bloodlines, known as Castlevania New Generations in Europe, meaning Castlevania goes back to being set in Europe, rather than in Japan for some odd reason. Sadly, the anime art style stays though. One fresh element of the title is the opportunity to enter paintings and teleport to locations that usually exist outside of the boundaries of Castlevania games. This helps to create the feel of a larger play area, and it allows for varied environments which make a nice change. Despite all of this though, the game is still much of the same as various other entries in the series. A great little game, but at this stage there are just so many of these bloody games. The third and final Nintendo DS installment came in 2008 and was named Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. The plot involves you playing as a female lead this time named Shanoa, who is part of an organisation sent to defeat Dracula after the Belmonte clan has vanished. Many different types of locales can be visited in the game, including forests, mountains and oceans. There are a total of 20 locations within an overworld map used to traverse between them. Besides fighting enemies and moving on from one location to the next, there are also a number of side quests for the player to solve. One reviewer labelled the game a cross between Symphony of the Night and Simon's Quest, noting that the high difficulty level in the game is balanced well by the role-playing elements it includes. Again, this is a fun little game, there is no question about that. But after this many straight similar entries in the series, I can see why this was the final Metroidvania game. Since Order of Ecclesia, we have now not had a Metroidvania game released in 9 years. The final handheld Castlevania game would be released on the Nintendo 3DS, 5 years after the release of Order of Ecclesia. 2013 saw the last handheld Castlevania game to date, Castlevania Lord of Shadow Mirror of Fate. This game was the direct sequel to the Lord of Shadow game on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. This game finally changes up the Castlevania formula, but the question is, was it for the better? In the Lord of Shadow reboot of the series, the games are now played in a three-dimensional environment and built around a deep combat engine. This newer take on Castlevania, gameplay wise, is played in the same kind of style as the likes of God of War and Bayonetta. This is a fun game to be fair, with great visuals, decent music and epic boss fights. After a ridiculous slew of Metroidvania style games, Mirror of Fate is a refreshing change to the handheld series. Also, I'd like to add, it is fantastic to see 3D Castlevania done so well for a change, especially when you consider my introduction to the franchise was via the Nintendo 64 titles. Yuck. Overall, when it comes to Mirror of Fate, an excellent job was done of repackaging the series, and it was a great change of pace at the time. Even if Lord of Shadow 2 on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 later didn't quite live up to expectations. So, whilst I'm here at this famous location, I would like to close off with my final thoughts. The history of Castlevania games on Nintendo handhelds is an interesting and varied one. We got a mixed bag in terms of quality on the original Game Boy, but as a result received two fantastic gems in terms of Belmonte's Revenge and Kid Dracula. Moving forward into the GBA and DS eras, we received 6 games which were all pretty decent, but due to their similarities and releases in quick succession, I feel it kind of diluted the franchise to some degree. Kind of like what Nintendo have done with the new Super Mario Bros. Series recently, or like what Capcom did to the Mega Man series previously. Sometimes less really is more, and that is before I even get moaning about all of the anime nonsense, taking away a lot of the series' character. Finally, we got Lord of Shadow Mirror of Fate on the 3DS, which, as stated earlier, is a fun change of pace to round off the series. So going forward, as we approach 2018, who knows if we are going to get more Castlevania games in the future. One thing is for sure though, we are certainly spoiled for choice in terms of quality Castlevania handheld games there are available to play. It is certainly not a horrible night to have a curse. Thank you for watching today's video. I have had a huge amount of fun visiting Transylvania to film handhelds around the world. I urge you all to visit this amazing location. It is so far one of the most interesting places I have visited on the entirety of planet Earth. And if you know me, I certainly get around, so that's a bold statement. Anyway, do not forget to like, comment and subscribe, and let me know what your favourite handheld Castlevania game is. What direction do you think they should bring the Castlevania franchise in? If Konami continue to make Castlevania games, that is. Also, which countries would you like to see me visit on this channel? So much to discuss. Let's chat in my comments. Shoutouts to Shizuka Kabayashi, Brad Warren, David Mountford, Andrew Bazanski, Atanas Garcia, Edward O'Reilly, Peter Dawn, Retail Archaeology, and all of my other patrons. Thank you for your ongoing support. You help me push this channel forward. Yeah! If you would like to be added to this prestigious list of patrons at some point, then check out my Patreon page. Ta-ta and farewell.